Get back to work, or you're fired." The sharp voice cut through the factory floor like a whip. Ethan Walker, dressed in faded overalls and steel-toe boots, winced as he watched the scene unfold. A young worker, barely in his 20s, stood frozen, his face pale as a sheet. "I'm sorry, sir. I just needed a moment to catch my breath," the worker stammered, gripping the conveyor belt for support. His uniform clung to his body, drenched in sweat. The man towering over him, dressed in an expensive suit despite the heat of the warehouse, sneered. Richard Kane, the factory's general manager, was infamous for his ruthless attitude. "A moment to catch your breath," Richard scoffed. "This isn't a charity. If you can't keep up, there's the door." Ethan clenched his fists, feeling an unfamiliar rage bubble inside him. No one in the factory knew his real identity. To them, he was just another new hire trying to make ends meet. But in reality, he was Ethan Walker, the billionaire owner of this very company. He had heard whispers of mistreatment within his factories, but numbers on a spreadsheet couldn't capture the human suffering. So, he had decided to step into the workers' shoes, to witness firsthand what went on behind the closed doors of his own empire. And now, after just a few days, he had seen enough. Richard turned his back on the trembling worker, barking orders at another employee. Ethan's jaw tightened. It was time for a reckoning. Ethan's muscles burned as he loaded another crate onto the conveyor belt. The air in the factory was thick with dust and the scent of hot metal. He could feel sweat trickling down his back, his hands raw from hours of labor. He had never worked a physically demanding job like this before, and it was an eye-opening experience. As he adjusted his grip on the next crate, a loud thud made him turn. The young worker who had been scolded earlier had collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. Instead of concern, Richard Kane stormed over with a scowl. "Get up, Parker. You're slowing everyone down." The boy tried to stand, but his legs wobbled beneath him. Ethan dropped his crate and rushed to help. "He's dehydrated. Someone get him water." Richard's eyes narrowed at Ethan. "Who the hell do you think you are, giving orders?" Ethan met his gaze without flinching. A worker who actually gives a damn. A few of the employees nearby stopped what they were doing, stealing cautious glances at the confrontation. Ethan knew he had to be careful. If he blew his cover now, the entire plan would be ruined. Richard scoffed. "If you're so concerned about him, then you can take his workload for the rest of the shift." He smirked, crossing his arms. "Unless you're too soft for this job, too." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Fine." The factory went silent for a moment before the workers slowly returned to their tasks. But Ethan knew the tables were about to turn. Ethan returned the next day, blending in with the workers once more. But this time, he wasn't just observing, he was planning. The morning shift started as usual, with workers punching in and heading straight to their stations. Ethan noticed Parker rubbing his shoulder, clearly in pain from yesterday's excessive workload. Several others looked just as drained. Richard Kane strutted onto the floor, barking orders like a drill sergeant. "Move faster. We've got deadlines to meet. I don't care if you're tired. This isn't a daycare." Ethan clenched his fists. Enough was enough. When lunchtime rolled around, he made his move. "Hey, Parker," Ethan said, approaching him and a few other workers who had gathered around a rusted picnic table outside. "How long have you been working here?" Parker sighed. 6 years. Feels like 20. "And have things always been this bad?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. Parker shook his head. "Worse. Every time someone complains, they either get extra work or they disappear." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Disappear?" "Yeah," another worker chimed in. "Fired. Or they quit because they can't take it anymore." Ethan exhaled slowly. "What if I told you things could change?" Parker scoffed. "Not unless a miracle happens." Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "What if that miracle is standing right in front of you?" The workers exchanged puzzled glances. "I say we stop taking his crap," Ethan continued. "If we stand together, Richard can't punish everyone." Parker frowned. "Are you talking about a strike?" Ethan nodded. "Not a full one, yet. But what if, for just one day, everyone slowed down? Didn't push themselves to exhaustion? Did the work, but not at Richard's impossible speed?" A murmur spread through the group. "That'd tick him off real good," one worker muttered. "And show him we're not just mindless machines," another added. Parker hesitated, then nodded. "All right, I'm in." The others followed suit, one by one. Ethan smiled. Step 1. Show Richard Kane the power of unity. The next day, the change was subtle but unmistakable. Workers moved at a steady human pace instead of Richard's breakneck demands. No one was slacking, but no one was overworking either. It didn't take long for Richard to notice. "Hey, pick up the pace!" he shouted, storming down the aisle. "We have quotas to meet." But no one budged. Richard's face turned red. "Are you all deaf? Move!" Still, no one sped up. Richard's nostrils flared. He stomped over to Parker and grabbed his clipboard. "Why are you moving so slow?" Parker shrugged. "Just doing my job, boss." Richard turned on Ethan. "And you're new. What makes you think you can slack off already?" Ethan met his glare. "I'm not slacking off. I'm working at a sustainable pace." Richard's jaw tightened. "Well, guess what? That's not how things work around here. You either work at my pace, or you don't work at all." Ethan tilted his head. "That's so?" Richard smirked. "Yeah. And since you're the ringleader of this little rebellion, you're fired." Silence fell over the factory floor. Workers exchanged worried glances, some already expecting Ethan to back down. But he didn't. Instead, Ethan chuckled. "You're firing me?" "That's right," Richard sneered. "Get lost." Ethan straightened his back and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a sleek black business card and held it up. Richard frowned. "What the hell is that?" Ethan smiled. "My company. You just fired your CEO." The factory floor, once filled with the hum of machinery and the shuffle of exhausted workers, now stood still. Every eye was on Ethan. The man they had assumed was just another laborer. Richard Kane's smirk faltered. "What kind of joke is this?" Ethan calmly handed him the business card. "Not a joke. I own this company. Ethan Grant, CEO." Richard snatched the card and stared at it, his eyes darting over the embossed logo. He laughed nervously, then scoffed. "You expect me to believe that?" Ethan pulled out his phone and tapped a few buttons. Within seconds, the factory's intercom crackled to life. "Attention, all employees," a professional voice announced. "Please gather in the main hall immediately for an important announcement from CEO Ethan Grant." Richard turned pale. The workers, still processing the revelation, began murmuring among themselves. "The new guy is the boss?" Parker's jaw dropped. "Holy crap!" Ethan tucked his phone away and stepped forward. "Shall we?" Richard followed Ethan into the main hall, his steps hesitant. The entire factory staff, dozens of workers in dusty uniforms, gathered, whispering amongst themselves. Ethan stepped onto the small stage at the front and grabbed the microphone. "I know you're all surprised," he began. "You've worked hard for years under terrible conditions, and no one listened. That changes today." A few cheers erupted. Ethan turned to Richard. "Mr. Kane has been running this factory like a dictatorship. He's overworked employees, ignored safety protocols, and ruled through fear." Richard stiffened. "I did what needed to be done." Ethan held up a hand. "No, you did what benefited you. And now you're facing the consequences." Richard sneered. "You think you can just waltz in and fire me?" Ethan smiled. "That's exactly what I can do." He turned to the crowd. "Effective immediately, Richard Kane is terminated. A loud cheer erupted from the workers. Richard's face turned red. You can't. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low and firm. Get out of my factory, Richard, before I have security remove you. Richard clenched his fists, his entire body shaking with rage. But he knew he had no choice. With one last hateful glare, he turned on his heel and stormed out. The second the door slammed shut, the factory floor exploded in applause. Parker turned to Ethan, shaking his head in disbelief. I can't believe this is real. Ethan grinned. It's real. And now, it's time for some real changes. Over the next few weeks, Ethan made good on his promise. Fair wages. Every employee got a well-deserved raise. Better working conditions. No more unsafe environments or inhumane hours. New leadership. Parker was promoted to shift supervisor, replacing Richard with someone who actually cared about the workers. As Ethan walked through the factory, he no longer saw exhausted faces filled with dread. He saw hope. Parker approached him with a smile. I never thought I'd see the day this place actually became a decent job. Ethan chuckled. Me neither. Parker hesitated. But why do this? You could have just stayed in your office and never dealt with any of this. Ethan looked around at the workers, his workers. Because power means nothing if you don't use it to help others. And with that, he walked forward, toward a factory no longer ruled by fear, but by fairness. The billionaire had disguised himself as a worker, and in doing so, changed dozens of lives forever.